some properties that have had an old pool in the backyard. Sometimes to save some money, and instead of excavating out all the concrete and putting in back dirt, they'll crush the concrete up and bury it.
So dirt ain't dirt. Okay,
No.
Dirt ain't dirt. Hi, welcome to Uniqueness Built In. I'm Mike Garabedian, your host, and we're here to visit about subjects in our unique perspective in the home building industry. Today I have Mike with Mike's Trees and More.
Correct.
So Mike, who are you? Why are you here?
Well, I'm the owner-operator of Mike's Trees and More. Obviously, tree service, we do removals and trimming, and then the more is kind of the big part, which is pretty much whatever the builders need as far as grading, excavation, dirt work, and so on.
So more. That reminds me of something. More! It is May 4th.
May the 4th be with you.
And me with you. My Episcopal pay and heritage coming out there. Okay, all right. So we're here to talk about dirt work.
Right.
And what prompted me on this was there's a project in a town that I drive by through a lot, and I noticed that this lot, which I've known about this lot for years, it's probably 15, 20 feet of fall. Mm-hmm. And somebody kept dumping dirt and dirt and dirt. And they hadn't built the house yet. They're filling this lot with dirt. And it wasn't good dirt.
Right.
There was concrete, there was junk, it was just junk dirt. Mm-hmm. And it was obvious that they didn't quite know what they were doing.
Right.
You can't just throw anything under a house.
No, if you're going to have a structure built on the property, then the material that is obviously subgrade or below where the house is going to be is imperative to having a good stable foundation, especially here in Texas where the soils they vary greatly from gray clay to red shale, and there's just a lot of different types of dirt material, and it varies greatly in the area that you're in. For instance, like an area in Trophy Club is a lot of rock, a lot of ironite, and a lot of groundwater. Mm-hmm. You go further into South Lake where you've got ancient riverbeds, you end up with gray sand mm-hmm. and clay. So there's just a big variety of dirt that you have to deal with, and your clay materials, they expand and contract with wetness and with dryness. And here in Texas, in the summers, we very rarely see any rain. So it's very important to have your subgrade dirts compacted properly, watered and stabilized properly, so that you don't have any settlement issues. I mean,
let's talk about that. So dirt ain't dirt. Okay, no. Dirt ain't dirt. I think about this. I've seen people that got lots. I'm having a whole bunch of dirt dumped in my lot, and you see these, 2-acre lots is covered mounds of dirt. And when you look at the dirt, it's different colors and it's different, mm-hmm. Why does it matter if all the dirt's different?
Well, it's not so much that the dirt is different as well. It's that the dirt is put in layers that are similar. In other words, let's say you have a clay layer for the base of, that's your ground level. Mm-hmm. And then you want to bring in a material to build upon that. Let's say you have to raise the lot 10 feet. In some situations, you may have to raise a lot 10 feet on one side and 3 feet on the other side, mm-hmm. where you've got a great slope in the middle. Mm-hmm. Well, just imagine, if you're trying to level that lot up and have a good steps bed, you want to have a similar layer of dirt here, another similar layer here, so that all the layers stack equally.
Is this like making a submarine sandwich, where like you put your ham, and then you put your turkey, and you put your cheese?
Yeah,
and then you put your lettuce.
If you're going to have mixed materials.
Right.
Now, on a larger project, like when they're doing buildings or very large structures and stuff like that, and some of the houses and stuff like that go up in those areas are massive. Mm-hmm. And so you want to be able to have those be stable for a long period of time. So in building a pad up, if you've got a pad that's got a big slope from front to back or left to right or something like that, your engineers are going to give you your recommendations of what you should do. Let's say you purchase a property. The previous owners have done things to that property that you have no control over. There's a lot of vegetation on the lot, and let's say let's say the thing was overgrown with weeds and brush and vines, and they decided, well, we know we're going to have to raise this lot 10 feet at some point in time to sell it. Let's just start getting some free dirt in there.
Well, let's talk about that. So, well, back up. So we did a show ages ago. We talked about the importance of picking out your lots and how sometimes owners will get you'll buy a lot because you got a great deal on a lot, and there's 5 or 10. And we've teased about this. I've teased it with you and my other dirt guys as well. That you walk a lot. If you walk a lot, you feel like it's only a couple of feet. When the reality of it is, when you put the laser on it,
Yes.
you see you may have 8 or 10 feet of fill.
Yeah.
So sometimes people will buy a lot with a slope that looks gentle, but the reality of it is it may be 5 or 10 feet of fill.
Right.
And that could be, we've had lots with thousands of yards of fill.
Yeah, I mean, and also too, and a lot of it is budgetary. A lot of times people will try to have, just open it up so people will drop free dirt. Pool companies, so when they dig properties, usually if they're in the same area, that's generally why they fall in there. So you could call it native material. It's not like getting caliche brought from Weatherford and dropped over here in Grapevine or something like that. That's usually not a situation. So you usually get native materials and foils.
So what happens if let's go back to the vegetation deal. And we've seen this before where a property will have grass and we'll talk about trees later, but we'll talk about grass and weeds and all that. And guys comes and dump some dirt on top of it.
Yeah, they dump it right in the only open spot they have available.
They put a whole bunch of stacks everywhere. And then what happens is then maybe a month later somebody comes with a bobcat and knocks it all down. What's the problem with doing that?
Well, the problem with doing that is whenever you put dirt on top of organic material, that organic material stays there. So once organic material is compressed, I mean, that's how we have coal and all those other materials down deep in the earth that have been covered. But what it is it makes a layer, and even if it's just a small layer, that organic material will start to break down and start to congeal, and eventually, as water tries to seep through that upper layer of dirt, it hits that layer of material, and the water stops. It can't penetrate that organic layer. So basically, it's like having a plastic sheet on top of your ground, and then you put dirt on top of it. If it's at a slope and you haven't done anything to level that slope off, that dirt eventually is just going to try to slide down that grade that was previously there, because there is literally a layer of slick organic material keeping the layer of dirt that you're adding from touching the layer of dirt that you have currently.
So what should someone do before they put dirt on their lot?
Well, the first thing you should do is scarify the lot. Take the grubbing material off. In other words, grass, top layer roots, if there's a lot of leaves or something like that, you want to get those off of there. Now, in a lot of situations, if you've got a large property or something like that, it's not a bad idea to scrape that material off and just pile it in the corner. It can be used later on in non-structural areas for backfill and for grubbing, or for bed fill and stuff like that. That material can be used for other things. And then what you want to do is you want to have a nice clean layer to put your dirt and your fill material on. If you can get it leveled prior to, so that you can, as you bring in material, you can bring it in lifts.
Well, I don't want to go lift yet, but you're saying you should grub the lot first.
You should definitely grub the lot. Get the organic material out, whatever is going to separate the dirt from becoming a congealed product.
So this episode is brought to you by Grubhub. Okay. Okay. So grubbing a lot, get all excess out of there.
Right.
And we've done that before. We've taken large
Yes.
lots. We take all the organic, we put it on the side. We basically compost it. We're composting it, let
Right.
it break down over time. And when it's ready to go, it's already broken down and you can work it in. And,
Yeah, because once you finish your grading, or once you finish your lot, your slab and everything, and you come in and you do your rough grade, basically you, once the concrete's poured, you kind of come in there and make a grade around the house so the water doesn't settle in any spots around there. You have positive flow away from the slab. And then at the finality portion of the house build, you can come in there and use some of that organic material that's broken down, because it's usually about a year or so before most of the houses are completed. So that material's been allowed to break down, and you just use that material to kind of fill in. Then when you come into your flower beds and stuff like that, they've got a good organic base to work with.
Okay, so let's talk about lifts.
Okay.
What is a lift?
Okay, well, what a lift is when you're bringing in material to raise the elevation of your pad. First thing you want to do is level off the existing pad as well as you can. In other words, if you've got a house that slopes from the front right corner down to the back left corner, you want to try to cut down that front right corner and bring it over. Basically a cut and fill. You cut this side and you fill this side with as much of the native material that you can, so that you don't have a large slope between the material that you currently have and the material you're bringing in. As far as lift goes,
So you want a straight line. You don't want two triangles.
yeah, you want it to be as flat as possible before you start bringing in the lifts. It's like when you're building a sandwich. You want to build it. You want your bread, you want your cheese, you want your meat, your mayo, and you stack it up so that it doesn't fall over. What happens when you do a sandwich and you have the tomatoes on the sides, and it starts falling off.
Okay, but no mayo, mustard.
No mayo, mustard.
mustard,
Okay, you're a
mayo
mustard guy.
stress,
Okay, well,
mayo,
you have
yeah.
to specify when you call it.
And real American mustard, the yellow stuff, not that weird grapefruit pond. All right, so talk to me about but the lift.
Well, on the lifts.
How thick should there's a dimension to the lift.
There is. Typically, you want to do a 4 to 6 inch lift. In other words, you want 4 to 6 inches of material, and you want to compact all that down to a similar height, get it nice and leveled off, and then come back in with another level. Now, depending on the type of compaction that you're doing, if you're doing a tractor compaction, in other words, you've got a machine out there that weighs 12 to 15,000 pounds, typically the weight of that tractor is going to be sufficient enough for you to get compaction. You want to get compaction somewhere between 85 to 95% compaction. You don't want it to be hard as a rock, but you also want to make sure that when you do your compactions over it, that you're not going to have any depression in the soil when you're walking on it or anything like that. Now, even though you do your compactions properly, you have to have the material at a correct moisture level to accept the compaction.
Well, let's go back to compaction again.
Okay.
So we've all seen this. We drive around and we see somebody puts a whole bunch of dirt in a lot. Maybe they grub hubbed it. Maybe they didn't. But they'll get a guy out there with a bobcat on a weekend. He'll just knock it all down and lay it all flat. And it could be 18 inches of dirt. And he just knocks it all down and moves on down the road, and they go put more dirt on top of that.
Well,
that's not a lift, is it?
That's not really a lift. That's just knocking down the material, leveling out the area or something like that. You're really not building a pad at that point. You're simply just spreading out dirt and filling up an area. To get compaction, you've got to be able to get the material to congeal, which means you have to have enough weight on top of it in order to do it. Now they offer, vibrator compactors, sheep's foot compactors, which have the big knobs on them. And what that does is it compacts it deeper. The vibration causes the sand and the dirt and everything like that to mix and gets the air out of it, and also pushes some of the moisture out of it. It makes the dirt congeal into a more solid substance.
So the significance of this is, if you just have somebody knock it down versus do lifts, whether they test or not test, because you don't always have to test, but if you do test, certain times you have to test. We'll hopefully get to that in a minute. But if you just knock it down, and then it sits there for however long, and then a year later somebody buys a lot and they look like grass and stuff they don't know, and they go grub hub it, and they put their house on top without testing it.
You're taking a real big liability.
And what could happen?
Well, you could have a lot of shifting, you could have a lot of lift and fall in the material, because once you put a house on top of that pad, you're going to have a moisture or vapor barrier somewhere underneath there to keep the moisture separate from the concrete slab. Or if you ever do get a slab leak, it keeps that water from getting underground below the house and causing all that dirt and material to shift and settle inside there. We'll go back to the sandwich analogy. If let's say you wanted to make a 4-layer sandwich, BLT, and everything else, and you stack that thing up and it's about like this. Okay? Now you take your glass of tea and you stick it on top of it. Do you expect that tea to stay there or fall over?
It fall.
Okay? Now what if you took your hand and you squished that sandwich down as far as you could, flat to the table, and then you set your glass of tea on there? What happens?
Probably.
You now have a stable foundation to put your glass of tea on. You now have a stable pad to put your house on.
I'm hungry.
We can call Grubhub.
Yeah, Grubhub. Come on, man. I remember my daughters used to make me these big peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that were like 8 layers, they're like that big, and that was a treat for me. It's really
Right.
great. But you'd have to squeeze it down when you had it sitting there. You'd have to squeeze it down to get in your mouth, and then all the stuff would ooze out. And
Right.
stuff. It was
Well,
so
the
good.
stuff that's oozing out
Yeah.
is the stuff that you don't want in the sandwich. It's stuff you want in the
Well, I
sandwich,
want it in my
but it's not
sandwich.
the stuff you don't
Yeah.
want on the grate.
Yeah.
I've done projects and properties to where there was a lot of groundwater in there.
Yeah.
We brought in a lot of really good material, and we got some rain events. Some groundwater would come up, and you could actually stand on the ground and bounce around, and you could just see the entire amount of ground waving around. When you've got situations like that, that's a special situation. You're going to have to do some type of substabilization on that.
Which is lime injection, or you go, or
Yeah,
you go
or
into,
you have to
dig it out and
excavate
bring
the
in
area that's
selector.
wet and bring in
Yeah.
dry material. I mean, and it can be a big expense. And the problem is when you're looking for a property, find out as much of the history of the property as you can. One, because you don't know what was there. Maybe they had I do, when we do some properties that had an old pool in the backyard. Sometimes to save some money, and instead of excavating out all the concrete and putting in back dirt, they'll crush the concrete up and bury it.
Or septic tanks.
Or septic tanks, the same thing. It's a void in the ground that's different from the native material. So you've got to treat that properly in order to have a good solid foundation.
Okay. Yeah. We talk about. I think about pools. We've done several pools. We had to back them out, and when we did the pools, we would have to have engineers come in and do a compaction test every 6 inches, 1 foot, or
Right.
2 feet. They do that little tool. They would do that with. But going these lots, you buy these lots, you don't know what happened to them.
Right.
I mean, we see we drive by these lots for years. We kind of know.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working in that area for 30 years. I've seen every piece. I've seen every road built up and every wall put in. So I know I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in those areas and most of those properties.
But if somebody comes in and out of town, buys it, finds a deal on a lot they don't know, which goes back to why we always tell our owners to get soils test when they get the option, before they buy the lot, get a soils test done.
That gives
and
you
that'll tell
so much information. Prior to this, I was just reviewing a soils report that I had for a customer up in Trophy Club, and they were hitting groundwater at 5 feet.
Hey.
And when you hit a natural source of groundwater, you've got to do something to curb that, because if you've got a lot of groundwater, let's say most of the houses in the areas are supported by a pier and beam foundation. They'll drill piers right through the pad that you set up. Now, there are some builders out there that suggest that, it doesn't matter about the dirt under the pad because I'm putting it on piers. Well, it does matter, because your piers have to have a stable source or a stable foundation in order for them to be stable.
Right.
If you have multiple layers of different types of materials, one area is going to heave differently than another. Whether you have piers or not, you're still going to have lift on one side and drop on one side, so on and so forth. So it's still very important to have a good mixed material under your house.
So we're talking about lifts and heaving. I'm going to the Hans and Franz skit from Saturday Night Live.
I'm Hans,
I'm France,
and we want to pump you up.
Which is probably totally irrelevant, but and our young people here don't know what that is, but it's funny. But the heave, when you heave, what causes a house to heave? Everybody talk about settling. My house is settling.
Okay.
But sometimes it's not settling; it's heaving. Why does it heave?
Okay, because the soil has what they call a plasticity index. In other words, if you took a handful of a clay-like material, put it in your hand and made a ball out of it.
Right.
Okay, and then you take that piece of clay and you stick it in some water. And the next day when you look at that piece of clay, it's going to be considerably larger because it has absorbed the water and the material. And when you pick it up, it stays in the material. Now, if you take similarly, if you take sand, let's say a real sandy material, well, first off, you're going to have a really hard time making a ball out of sand.
Right.
But if you add water to that sand, that water's going to go right through it. So it's not going to expand or swell. So let's say you have a lot of clay on one side of your yard and a lot of sand on your other side of your yard. Well, when that clay expands, it's got to go somewhere. Hydraulic pressure. That's exactly what hydraulic pressure is when you add a material or a water source or some type of pressure there, it's going to expand. Well, it's going to lift up on one side of the house. Well, if you don't have that same type of material on the other side of the house, let's say you have more sand in that area, it's not going to lift. So now you have one side lifting, the other side staying stable or even regressing if you have another type of material. So that heave can literally, if you've ever gone up and down the street and you've seen where some sidewalks have buckled up around trees, well, you've got people from the tree roots that are literally raising the sidewalks up. You'll see it in roadways too. When you see a pothole in the roadway and you see like a little trickle of water coming out near where that thing was, that's where there's been water under there that has expanded the soils and raised it up. Now you have a bump, which eventually will crack into a pothole.
So, you think about that. You got the, you go south of here, Rendon, Mansfield, out there, Kennedy, all that stuff. It's got that black gumbo. And I remember we built a house out there years ago, and you go out there in the summer, it's really dry, and these big old cracks.
Yes,
form.
you'll have cracks out there that you could stick a basketball.
Oh, absolutely. And that's because?
That's because of the plasticity of the soil. When it's dried out, it contracts and it shrinks. You hear tales of like out in the Greenville area and stuff. When I was a kid that lived out that way, there were cracks big enough to where cows could get stuck in them.
Right.
During the 80s, during the heat wave of the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a lot of weather fluctuations around here. We've had some years. We had a 13-year drought not too long ago.
Yeah.
You and I built a lot of houses during that period of time. We spent a lot of money on re-wetting soils and compacting soils to make sure that we had the soils in a situation that they were going to survive through the drought and survive through the wet seasons and have a good soil.
Is that why
foundation?
Is that you drive by a lot, you'll see. Sometimes I have fire hydrant. We use fire hydrant meters and all that. But sometimes you drive by a lot, you see a bunch of dirt and just have sprinklers on it. And you go, why are there sprinklers on a lot? Why are they watering dirt?
Well, because they want the soil to be consistent. That's the biggest thing that you can do is have good, consistent layers of material. When we bring in material, and we've outsourced a lot of material from local digs and pool builders and stuff like that, or one property has a lot of extra material, but it's 2 miles down the road. It's the same material. It's just like digging a hole in one part of the yard and putting it in the other. So we'll bring those materials in. If we put them in correct lifts, the moisture levels are right, you can use that material all you want. There's a lot of other times where the scarcity of material is definitely a real thing. As I've always said in dirt work is when you need it, you can't find it. And when you don't need it, it's everywhere.
Right.
There's some local pits in the area that have good, consistent material that we call select fill.
Yeah.
What that is a mixture of clay and sand, but it's in a mixture so that when you compact them, the clay holds the material together. The sand allows the clay not to expand and crack, or when it tries to, when it does expand, it expands into the sand. When it does contract, the sand fills in the gaps in the clay. So it's a very good, very stable material that's used. And if at the proper wetness when it's put down and the proper compaction, it'll save you from ever having a problem with your slab.
So in short, sandy select is good, black gumbo bad.
Black gumbo bad.
Very bad. Very bad.
Caliche even worse.
Oh, caliche. Ooh.
Las Colinas is a very, very bad area for soil. Right over by the golf course, as a matter of fact. There's a subdivision in there. We did a lot of work. They actually developed a new type of foundation where they built the houses up on piers, but the lift on the soil was literally 9 to 10 inches.
Jesus.
In other words, when it was dry, it's down here. When it's wet, it's up here. There's no house that's going to survive that. So basically, they built a honeycomb system underneath there, which allowed the soil to get pushed up under there, but not lift the slab and then contract. So, innovation has a lot to do with it, and the types of engineerings that they offer nowadays help work with the soil types that we do have out here.
That's why the Los Colinas roads are all like this. You go through those. That's a hint. So let's talk about trees. Okay. We did the more.
Right.
Let's talk about trees now.
Get back to the basics.
So you cut a tree down. Of course, trees are everywhere. They're basically big weeds.
You could go there.
That's what I went there. But no, you have trees everywhere. Some trees are good. Some are not. Mesquite, post oaks, what have you. if you have a wooded lot, obviously you have to cut the trees down to get them out of your foundation. But, you know, I guess you could save a few bucks and just cut the tree down flush to the ground, just put some dirt over the top of it, and just build, keep on building.
Well, then
why
we
shouldn't you do that?
we refer back to the organic matter in the soil. And organic matter is grass, vines, weeds, and trees.
Okay.
Those tree roots are a lot more substantial than anything else that you'll encounter on the property. You know, a taproot on an oak tree will typically be down 4 to 5 feet below the surface that you're not going to see.
Right.
Let's say you get a giant sycamore tree or a big silverleaf maple tree or something like that. That root system, let's just say the tree is maybe only 1.5 feet around. That root system expands about 6 feet out from the base of that tree, from the center of the tree, 3 to 4 feet this way, 3 to 4 feet that way.
Right.
Well, if you don't get rid of that material, then you don't have consistency in the soil because you have soil, you have roots, and then you have soil. So what happens when that organic matter breaks down? It creates a void. Not to mention, it also invites insects, termites, carpenter ants, and other insects like that to come into those areas, which you don't want to have termites feasting on an old root underneath your house, okay? Because they've got to go, when they get through with that, they're looking for something else.
Right.
So it's very important in the excavation process or setting up the pad process to take out the roots and the stumps within a 5 to 6 foot vicinity of where the actual pad is going to be.
So is that when you go to a job site or you go by a lot, you see that they're cutting down trees and then also these big old pile, they're actually digging out the roots, these big old massive balls of.
Yes.
That's why they're doing that. They're not to get that out.
No, I mean it does increase a little bit of the cost because you have to excavate a tree out and you have to bring in material to fill in that void.
Right.
So you're removing one type of material that you don't want in the pad and you're putting in another type of material that you do want in the pad. So, and all of that is still to build yourself a good stable pad. If you have organic material in the pad site itself, a lot of times we do additions. People will put a garage on or an extra thing in the backyard and they've got an old tree there. It's like, well, we're going to take the tree down. We'll just cut it down and build over it. No, same situation, whether it's a new house or an add-on. You've got to remove that organic material for the stability of the soil. Also, too, typically under trees that have been there for a long time, let's say you're taking out a pretty big oak tree that's been in your backyard. Well, that thing's been dropping leaves for 40, 50 years. It's been dropping acorns for that same amount of time, too. And the makeup of the material underneath that tree is going to be different than something that's out in the open where there's nothing but grass and stuff like that on there. So when you're taking out that tree stump, you've also got to take out all that extra organic material. A lot of properties that haven't been built on now have been previously farmland around here. So, you know, you've got to deal with old barbed wire fences and briars and stuff like that, you know, and we won't even get into bamboo. So whoever planted bamboo in the backyard, they did themselves a big disservice.
Hey, it wasn't my idea. So basically you say you got a grub hub under the trees.
Yes, you got to grub them out in order to build on top.
All right, so let's talk about rock.
Okay.
So now if you go, I guess, west of 35, and you go south of here to the hill country,
Yeah, you
there's
start
a
getting
lot
that
of rock.
Caliche shell.
Yeah. So how does that
And
matter?
limestone.
Yeah. How does that matter when you do a house
Well, it's similarly when you're trying to get the soft material out of in the clay and the sandy areas. The similar situation with rock in those other areas. Obviously, you have to have a consistent base. In other words, it needs to be the same material from one end of the house to the other and as straight down as possible in those areas. A lot of times you run into big rocks. And I've pulled rocks over in Vaquero. We were doing some properties over there. We pulled out a rock the size of a car that was right where the house pad was going to be. Well, if you're trying to build up a substantial pad and you've got a rock here and everything else is soft material, obviously the soft material over time is going to compact and that rock is not moving. So you've got to remove that rock. You've got to get the material to be consistent. That's the name of the game in building a pad, is a good, solid, consistent material all the way across, and then you've got yourself a good foundation to build on.
Yeah, we did another episode. We talked about slow is fast, fast is slow. I think it was a brilliant episode. But one of the things about it was we talked about when people rush.
Right.
They want to rush to get started. But when you're doing prep work and dirt work and you're digging down and you're finding rock, you're finding your tree stumps, you're finding organic material, you're finding underground streams and stuff, you can't rush that. Because if you do, in theory, you can just throw some dirt on there, throw a house up, and then...
Well, see, that's the problem that you come in there is you're skipping the steps.
Right.
You have to go in there with the process of, one, you have to core drill. You got to find out what you're working with.
Soil test.
Soil test. So you get a core sample, find out what material is under there, find out if there's water underground, so on and so forth. And then you generally follow the recommendations of the engineer. Will tell you what they need to do in order to make that foundation work in that specific area.
And if you run into an issue that's outside those, you can always have the engineer send an inspector out and do it on site, and you show them what's going on, and they can give you options or workarounds or alternative details to do that. But going back to it takes time to do this, and if you don't do this, or if you come across, have you been doing this for at least a year?
Yeah, I mean, what you talking about the dirt work? I've been doing the dirt work for
2
probably
years?
25 years.
Okay, so you almost got it figured out. But no, after a while you do it. When you're grading out a lot, you will see indicators that will tell you that I need to be looking for. You'll see stuff.
A good excavator is going to see the problem before it becomes a problem. A good engineer is going to detect the problem. A good builder is going to find the people that can figure those things out before they can become a problem. If you skip the steps, if you try to get to the end result without taking the proper steps, you're not going to get the final result. You're going to pay for it either now, you're going to pay a lesser price. It may cost you a little bit more time to get things done properly, but it's a whole lot better than paying for a repair later on or having warranty issues later on that could have been prevented and solved with proper work.
So going too fast can cost you money.
It can cost you a lot of money.
All right.
And time.
Yeah, and time. Yeah. Let's talk about the trees real quick. So y'all have a tree service.
Yes.
And y'all take down trees and clean them up. But when after a family's been in a house for a while, like at our house, I mean, I can just look at a tree and kill it. I don't know. It's a gift.
Well,
but I mean, you have trees that get sick. They have dead wood. They go in the shock.
Yeah.
What are the things that people can do to?
Well, typically, especially on a lot of new builds, and I've done a lot of new builds over the years. We do install tree protection. The city requires it. Most of them, the Tree City USAs, and there's some government entities that require you to do some type of tree protection to try and save the native trees around the house. But you're also changing completely changing the environment around these trees. You're changing the water table on the house. You're changing irrigation schedules. Now these trees are going to have more water available at the surface. Before they had to pull water from the springs and underground water and stuff like that. Now it's going to be readily available. You're putting fertilizers on your grass. You're putting pest controls. All those things do affect the trees after the house is put in. With that being said, trees that you try to save close to the construction area are going to get, what we call construction damage, which is just natural. You're compacting the roots when you go by the trees, when you're driving near a tree with a tractor or a pickup truck. That's why we put tree protection up, to try to protect the trees as much as possible, keep the trucks and equipment away from the drip lines of the trees so that you don't compact the roots. Now, and going back to let's say the beginning portion of a house pad too, there's a couple of different ways to get rid of the trees that are in the pad site that have to be taken out. You can come in with a tractor and knock them down, or which is what I prefer, is going in there and selectively removing the trees so that you don't damage any of the other trees in the area. In other words, you don't want to knock a tree down into a tree that you're saving. Sometimes it's a little bit more expensive to do it that way, but the chances of damage to the outlying trees is a lot less, and a better chance of those trees surviving after the construction process.
Well, let's talk about the trees. Our owners want to try to save trees. And, I mean, we had a house where we actually did a curve around the driveway. We did a big sweep in the driveway.
You build houses around the trees.
200-year-old oak, and it died.
Right.
So, I mean, what is, post oaks are the most common around here. There's a whole host of other trees. Folks try to save trees, but how close to a house does it just become like you're just better off taking it out now instead of later?
Well, if it's an established tree, let's say it's a 30 or a 40-year-old oak tree or a pecan tree or
Right.
something like that, the first thing that you want to do is maybe have an arborist or somebody who knows trees come out there and take a look at it and give you a basically a survivability prognosis. Okay, if you put the house here, you're going to be limiting the sunlight to the house. You're putting a 2-story house in next to a tree. You're going to block half the sunlight going to the root systems that it had. Usually within 10 or 15 foot of the immediate building itself, anything in that area is going to be a real tough time keeping it going because you're going to change the environment for that tree so much. And there's going to be a lot of work done around it.
And
too.
it may not be the first year. We've seen
I mean,
2, 3, 4 years down the road.
The thing about trees is they are affected by they're affected immediately by something that happens to it directly. But as far as environmentally, it can be 3, 4, or even 5 years later on down the road where the tree just finally can't sustain itself anymore. You know, you might see some yellowing in year 2 or year 3. The next year you got a dead branch or 2 here or there. The next year, let's say we have a bad winter, the tree doesn't do well and just doesn't show up in the springtime. It's browned out. You know, that's typically the sequence that happens. But you're not going to lose the tree. Typically it doesn't die in the first or second year unless something drastic happened, you know, like you had a big weather event that flooded the area for a long time and something that changes its immediate environment quickly.
So we talked about dirt, we talked about grub hub, we talked about trees, we talked about rock.
Right.
Anything else we need to talk about for getting a lot ready for a house?
Well, I mean, the grading, which is very important to the lot, not just the house pad itself, but you've got an entire property now. Sometimes you lose trees because of the grading that you've got to do because you've still got to get the water away from the house. Right. You got to make sure that all the grade work is done. Your pre-grade, final grade, and everything else.
We should have a tree farm sponsor this show because we're going to take out all the trees. Somebody's got to buy trees to replace them.
That's true. You're going to, and a lot of times, and in a lot of instances, especially the cities around here, you have a variance where if you have to take out so many caliper inches of trees to build the house there, then you've got to replace that many caliper inches of trees.
We covered a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked
Well,
about,
there's a lot to cover.
sandwiches. We talked about not burying trees. We talked about soil. We talked about other sandwiches. We talked about tractors. We talked about compaction. Talked about rock.
Yep.
We didn't talk about anthropology, but
No.
you know. All right, great. All right, Mike. So if they want to buy a lot of dirt, remove a lot of dirt, grub hub a lot, or take care of trees, how will they find you?
Well, my cell number is 817-269-9557. I have an email address of mikestreemail@icloud.com, and you can contact me that way. We do free estimates and consultations with builders and homeowners and potential homeowners.
And you're mostly in the Dallas-Fort Worth area?
Mostly in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the South Lake, Keller, Mid-Cities area. We will go to other places, you know, if needed, based on availability.
Yeah. If there's a sandwich involved, you may drive.
Yeah, you know, you got to have lunch every day.
Yeah. All right, great. Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate you coming
I
out.
appreciate you. Thanks very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for watching Uniqueness Built In. Have you seen something interesting on our show that you would like us to elaborate on? Or perhaps you've seen something out in the wild that you want us to talk about on our show? Feel free to email us at the email on the screen, info@garabedianproperties.com.